Hello and welcome to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, your weekly dose of the top pro-life news and issues, all from a Catholic perspective. I am your host, Catherine Hadro, in our Washington, D.C. studio. Thank you for joining us. In this week's show, the Department of Justice resumes capital punishment. We have Catholic analysis with Dr. Matthew Bunson. Abortion groups release a blueprint for their plan, We Speak Out, and this.
Sometimes when you just get a few more people on the sidewalk, got a couple of prayer powerhouses, you got someone reaching out with their words. I mean, it really is an incredible, unstoppable combination.
Their mission is to be the hands and feet of Christ outside abortion facilities. Hear about the growing role of Sidewalk Advocates for Life in the pro-life movement. But first, our top story, primary frontrunner Vice President Joe Biden doubled down on his support for the taxpayer funding of abortion on demand during this week's Democratic presidential debate hosted by CNN.
Talk about now running for president and you change your position. On the Hyde Amendment, Vice President, where you made a decision for years to withhold resources to poor women to have access to reproductive health care, and including women who were the victims of rape and incest. Do you now say that you have evolved and you regret that?
The fact is that the senator knows that's not my position. Everybody on this stage has been in the Congress, and the Senate or House has voted for the Hyde Amendment at some point. The Hyde Amendment in the past was available because there was other access for those kinds of services provided privately. But once I wrote the legislation making sure that every single woman would in fact have an opportunity to have health care paid for by the federal government, everyone, that could no longer stand. I support a woman's right to choose. I support it's a constitutional right. I've supported it. I will continue to support it. And I will in fact move as president to see to that the Congress legislates that is the law as well.
The Hyde Amendment prevents the taxpayer funding of abortion. It was implemented in 1976 and had long enjoyed bipartisan support. Biden backed the amendment throughout his political career until he flipped his view this June. For a pro-life analysis of this week's Democratic debates, we are joined in studio by Mallory Quigley, the Vice President of Communications for the Susan B. Anthony List, and Tom McClusky, the President of March for Life Action, the political arm of the March for Life. Thank you both for being here for this important analysis.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So the topic of abortion finally came up at the end of debate night 2 when Senator Harris pressed Vice President Joe Biden on his flip-flop on the Hyde Amendment. Let's take a listen to her follow-up question.
Well, why did it take you so long to change your position on the Hyde Amendment? Why did it take so long until you were running for president to change your position on the Hyde Amendment?
Because there was not full federal funding for all reproductive services prior to this point.
Mallory, can you clarify first off, what is the Hyde Amendment?
Yes, well, as you mentioned, it's legislation to stop taxpayer funding of abortions in Medicaid. It does, contrary to what the Vice President said, include exceptions for rape and incest, and as you said, it's long-standing bipartisan policy that has had the support of many pro-life Democrats for decades. It's saved more than 2 million lives in the last 40 years, and Vice President Biden was the last candidate to sort of hold out on support for this. He has supported it over the years, and to see him flip-flop, I think, speaks to the grip hold that the abortion lobby has on this Democratic primary field.
Tom, what does Biden's flip on the Hyde Amendment reveal to you?
Well, it's emblematic of what we're seeing within the full Democratic Party. Joe Biden actually used to attend March for Life back in the early 1980s. And it was when he ran in 1988, he still self-identified as pro-life, but hid behind everybody's decision is their own personal decision. Except now, if you look at the Democratic platform and the evolution of that, and even the safe and rare that we used to hear back in the day from the Clinton administration, even that's been thrown out the window. So it's really a shame that a party that says it stands up for social justice does not extend that to the womb.
And I want to mention Vice President Biden also identifies as Catholic. It was over 4 hours worth of debates this week, and the word abortion was not mentioned once, but there were euphemisms. Women's right to choose, reproductive health care. Why is that?
Well, I think you're seeing this among a lot of those on the other side, those among who I would call pro-abortion. You look at what happened to the former Planned Parenthood president, Leanna Wen, who was forced out because she wanted to identify abortion as health care. Just this past week, you saw a memo from NARAL telling their canvassers, don't mention, stay away from the word abortion, don't say abortion is health care. And now you have the presidential candidates, all of whom support abortion on demand, and even against legislation such as the Born Alive Act, all applauding or all afraid to say the word abortion.
There's been so much talk last night in the debate about the need to beat President Trump, and I think maybe the whole field is starting to look outward and say, look, eventually we're going to have to stop catering to this extreme minority on the Democratic side that supports what the platform stands for, abortion on demand up until the moment of birth, paid for by taxpayers. And maybe they're starting to realize that they are going to have to pivot at some point to appeal to people in the middle. And their position on abortion is dramatically unpopular with independents, even with Democrats. A third of all Democrats identify as pro-life, and even people who self-describe as pro-choice oppose the radical nature of these positions. I mean, all the senators, right, that are in this field voted against the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. That should be common sense legislation to protect babies once they've been born, give them the same care as infants born premature at the same stage. So
it's really telling.
And they're really doing the party, and the moderators are doing the Democratic Party a disservice by not bringing this up. Because if you remember in 2016, with the debates between candidate Trump and Secretary Hillary Clinton, where President Trump did what we've begged candidates to do for years, and I think a lot because of the coaching from Marjorie, he described a partial birth abortion right on stage. And it was extremely powerful, and Hillary Clinton really did not know how to respond to it. And it exposed, I think, the radicalism of her views. And now they're setting up whoever the candidate might be exposed again.
And I know we're talking about Democratic debate analysis, but do any of these candidates disagree with each other on the abortion issue? Is there any debate?
That's the thing, Catherine, is that there really isn't any daylight between these candidates now, especially now that Vice President Biden has completely, upended the apple cart on his position on the Hyde Amendment. So Susan B. Anthony List has actually released a website today, lifeontheballot.com. So you can go there and you can see the voting records and the positions that all of the Democratic candidates have taken, as well as an analysis of President Trump's pro-life wins while he's been in office. And yeah, that's the thing. There's just no difference between any of them. They've actually been jockeying prior to last night, jockeying to outdo each other on abortion. They've come out with these different healthcare plans that all support abortion on demand. Senator Harris actually has a very, people could debate the constitutionality of it, to cancel all of the state pro-life laws. It's disturbing.
And to your point, we didn't hear a lot about abortion in this week's debate, but we did hear a lot about healthcare. Let's take a listen.
Healthcare is a human right, not a privilege. I believe that. I will fight for that.
We must agree that access to health care must be a right and not just a privilege of those who can afford it.
Let's be clear about this. We are the Democrats. We are not about trying to take away health care from anyone.
What should our viewers know about these candidates' healthcare plans, especially when it comes to the abortion issue?
Well, every single one of them, a large majority, and even some who don't have a record, felt compelled to come out and say they were for something like Medicare for All. And Medicare for All has been celebrated by pro-abortion groups like Planned Parenthood and NARAL because it goes after the Hyde Amendment and goes after all the other pro-life provisions that have been in for decades. And even the more, the media uses the word moderate, but it is like comparing apples to apples when we're talking about these candidates in abortion. Even the more moderates, like Joe Biden and all, and Pete Buttigieg, feel that in their health care plan, abortions for all needs to be part of it.
That's incredible. Thank you both for being here for this important pro-life analysis of the Democratic debates. Tom McClusky and Mallory Quigley, thank you.
Thank you.
Catherine.
With a pro-abortion majority in the House of Representatives, it's absolutely vital for pro-life lawmakers to fight any efforts that undermine life-affirming legislation. Just this week, we saw House Speaker Nancy Pelosi block a vote on the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act for the 80th time. This is just one example of how the majority in the House has an extreme pro-abortion agenda and why our pro-life lawmakers need to stand strong. Which brings us to this week's call to action. Go to ProLifeWeekly.com to tell your members of Congress to oppose any legislation that would weaken existing pro-life laws and policy. When you get to our website, ProLifeWeekly.com, you'll be able to fill out your information and deliver this message directly to your state's lawmakers. There have been significant pro-life accomplishments in this administration, from the expanded Mexico City policy to the Title X Protect Life rule. And we cannot afford to lose those great pro-life advances. Our pro-life lawmakers must stand strong for life in the face of a divided Congress. Let's make sure our voice is heard and Congress knows to oppose any legislation that weakens existing pro-life laws and policies. Send your message by going to ProLifeWeekly.com. Turning now to our next segment, the United States federal government will resume capital punishment for the first time in 16 years. Attorney General William Barr, who is Catholic, instructed the Bureau of Prisons last week to schedule executions starting in December for 5 men, all accused of murdering children. This ends an informal moratorium on executions at the federal level. The Catechism of the Catholic Church's teaching on the death penalty was updated last year with a statement from Pope Francis calling the death penalty, quote, inadmissible because it is an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person. For trusted Catholic analysis on this news, we are joined now by Dr. Matthew Bunson, a historian, theologian, and senior contributor for EWTN News. Dr. Bunson, welcome back to the show.
Always great to be with you.
First off, can you clarify the Church's teaching on capital punishment? It was revised as recently as last year.
Just last year, in fact, in 2018, Pope Francis tightened up the language of the Catechism. I remember having a great discussion with you and Father Thomas Petrie on this very topic. The Holy Father, building on the work of the most recent of popes, in particular Pope St. John Paul II, who issued a revision to the Catechism in 1997 that described capital punishment as rare, if not non-existent. In other words, we are moving away from our traditional understanding of it, but while still accepting the right of the state to use capital punishment. Pope Francis introduced the term inadmissible. That the death penalty should now be considered inadmissible because it's a violation of the dignity of the human person. But there were a couple of other fine points that we need to really be clear of. The first is that in the paragraph that was revised in 2267 in the Catechism, he stresses a deeper understanding now of the dignity of the human person, especially in the modern world. He also notes the advances in our understanding of the penal system. In other words, we have ways of preventing crimes, but also with dealing with criminals humanely. The other really pertains to an understanding of the way that we can lead people, hopefully, to redemption, to reform. And that, in a way, is the kickoff point for a lot of the discussion that's followed with William Barr's decision.
Absolutely. And these 5 criminals who are scheduled for execution have committed truly horrific crimes. There are victims, real victims, in each case. So what do you say, Dr. Bunson, to Catholics who feel conflicted on whether or not capital punishment truly is justice for these cases?
Well, there is always a longing for justice. There are crimes that cry out for justice, as always been said. The Catechism itself, as I was just noting, stresses the importance of the idea of redemption, of trying to bring people to reform. Pope John Paul II in Evangelium Vitae in chapter 9 describes the fact that even a murderer does not lose his innate dignity. And he frames that within the discussion of Cain and Abel. And he says that God made a sign of this. In other words, he set Cain apart to avoid having him killed. He then also uses a quote from St. Ambrose, who goes to mercy, the combination, the balance that we have to have of mercy and justice. And so that's, in many ways, what John Paul II was getting at in his change in 1997. But we're seeing that also in the language of Pope Francis. When he addressed Congress in 2015, he talked about the fact that we need to have that room for possible reform of the human person who has committed these crimes. And then in the statement from the USCCB, Bishop Frank Duane who's representing the conference, talks about the same thing, about we have to balance that mercy and justice. So I can understand why people have this longing for justice, but we have to understand as well what the Catechism is asking of us.
Attorney General William Barr is Catholic and is being widely criticized for this decision. Does this criticism compare to that of lawmakers who are advancing a pro-abortion legislation?
Well, in the statement from the Justice Department announcing the resumption of the use of capital punishment, the Attorney General, who is essentially the highest lawyer in the land, made an important distinction. He said that this is the completion of an investigation, of a review of the process that dates all the way back to 2014 and the botched execution, as you'll recall, that took place that really was quite a bit of a scandal across the United States. So the review was completed, and so with that review completed, he green-lighted the resumption of the death penalty. That's important because I go back to the fact that when he was in his confirmation hearings, a lot of people were asking, would William Barr have his faith interfere with his fulfillment of his duties as Attorney General? Was the fact that he's Catholic going to somehow disqualify him from his task? We see in this decision, clearly not. He has made this decision. But now we're also seeing many critics saying, well, should he now be barred from communion in exactly the same way that Catholic politicians who support abortion?
Right.
They are, of course, qualitatively different because the death penalty does not rise to the level of an intrinsic evil. It remains the right of the state in exactly the same way that abortion is intrinsically evil. So to try to compare those two sets of public figures, I think, is a fallacy, but it's also a trap, the trap of the seamless garment that tries to look at everything holistically in terms of the pro-life movement, but does not differentiate among those things that are intrinsically evil and those things that are subject to prudential judgments where we can have disagreements over policy.
That is an incredibly important distinction. So finally, Dr. Bunson, given this recent news, how do you view the current administration when it comes to the pro-life issue?
Well, back in 2016, I know we were all covering it here at EWTN.
Right.
We had a lot of concerns about how exactly and would Donald Trump be authentically pro-life. In the years that have followed, we have seen his appointment of a number of pro-life justices, a number of pro-life judges. We have seen a number of enactments on the part of the administration, the Mexico City policy. We're not going to agree with every administration. Being Catholics, and this is something I know you talk about all the time, being Catholics does not mean that we adhere to one political party.
Right.
And that is certainly the case here. We are going to have disagreements with any administration in exactly the same way that we will support any administration that is searching for the common good. In this case, supporting the authentic pro-life movement, in particular, doing everything we can to build a culture of life that reduces abortion.
Dr. Matthew Bunson, senior contributor for EWTN News, thank you so much for being here and giving us this insight in this incredibly important news story. Really grateful.
Always a joy to be with you.
Thank you. When we come back,
a lot of women who arrive at Planned Parenthood have no idea that these organizations exist and that they're ready to go to bat for them, that they're ready to help them with finances or with school, making a life plan.
They train peaceful and prayer-filled pro-lifers outside abortion facilities. We'll introduce you to Sidewalk Advocates for Life. Stay tuned as EWTN Pro-Life Weekly continues after this break. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I am your host, Catherine Hadro. Nearly 80 pro-abortion groups came together recently to release their blueprint for abortion on demand that's funded by the government. That is this week's Speak Out segment. The policy agenda, called the Blueprint for Sexual and Reproductive Health, Rights and Justice, rolled out in July and exceeds 100 pages. The pro-abortion wish list includes an end to the Hyde Amendment and a call for the Senate to only confirm judges who support abortion. And what's especially alarming for Catholic pro-lifers, this blueprint says Catholic hospitals should be forced to provide reproductive health care services that contradict church teaching. One of the nearly 80 groups to endorse this plan is Catholics for Choice. Catholic bishops have consistently rebuked that group, calling it a front for the abortion lobby that falsely characterizes itself as Catholic. While the abortion groups behind this plan say it will bring about a future in which health, rights, and justice are protected, nothing could be further from the truth. This blueprint pushes self-managed abortion, which is dangerous for women's health. It pushes discrimination against Catholic hospitals, which is dangerous for our religious rights. And most devastatingly, it pushes an extreme abortion agenda, which squashes justice for the unborn. But if anything good can come from this blueprint, it's that we now have some transparency from the abortion lobby. Written out for our very eyes to see is their extreme abortion agenda, and we, the pro-life movement, know what we are up against. Remember, there is something you can do to counter today's culture of death. Follow this week's call to action. Go to ProLifeWeekly.com to tell your members of Congress to oppose any legislation that would weaken existing pro-life laws and policy. It is on the sidewalks outside abortion clinics where women may change their mind, turn around, and choose life for their child. That's why one group is dedicated to reaching women right then and there and showing them love. Here's this week's Pro-Life Focus.
Let me see. Okay, these have the pregnancy center filled in, so you can always transfer that over.
Texas pro-life Catholic Lauren Musica considers the sidewalk mission territory.
I love their stuff. Support after abortion is really, really good. We actually go to where abortions are taking place, and our goal is to stand in the gap because so many of these women that arrive at the abortion or abortion referral facility have no idea that there are these life-affirming resources, pregnancy resource centers that may be next door or right across the street that are willing to give them free services and fill whatever needs that brought them to the facility.
Musica is executive director of Sidewalk Advocates for Life, a group that steps in to meet pregnant women in need, right outside and around abortion facility walls. We went to witness this advocate in action outside of Planned Parenthood, and her power to encounter quickly became obvious to us.
It was all hitting her.
Musica had just spoken with a mother who took the abortion pill and still had time for an abortion pill reversal.
She was almost in tears. She was like, let me think. And I said, just, call them as soon as she has hyperemesis gravidarum, which is like severe form of morning sickness, which we're seeing more and more like at the abortion facility. And so I heard the key words and I said, I have 2 friends that just went through this. There's 2 new medications out there. It's helping women function. And she's like, that's all it was. It was just, I was so sick. And I said, I totally understand.
Sidewalk Advocates for Life is built on the philosophy prayer and love must come first for a woman in an unplanned pregnancy.
Please help this little one to be saved. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
The openly Christian organization trains pro-lifers on how to be the hands and feet of Christ outside abortion clinics by reaching women as they are walking in for their abortion appointment and letting them know about life-affirming alternatives.
We're a movement of love, and sometimes we tend to forget that the women who are going into Planned Parenthood really need us to be a light, to be love for them, to show them a different option, a better option. On the front lines, what's happening is these women who are going in there and facing these horrific circumstances, they really need us to be there for them. They need us to love them and show them that there's a better way.
What we let them know is that, you are enough. You can parent. There is the loving option of adoption available to you, and we will be there to help you to make a life plan that does really bring you peace in the short and in the long term.
This strategy of leading with love works. In the 5 years since its launch, Sidewalk Advocates for Life has grown to about 200 locations around the globe and witnessed about 7,000 babies being saved.
We've helped even 64 abortion workers who have wanted to leave the business get connected with Abby Johnson's abortion worker ministry.
Musica has a long history with fellow Texan and pro-life leader Abby Johnson, one that dates back to when Abby Johnson was still a Planned Parenthood worker herself.
I started out as a prayer volunteer, and then I was trained my sophomore year as a sidewalk counselor, and I was praying for Abby.
This year, Abby Johnson's conversion story, as portrayed in the recent movie Unplanned, has been a catalyst empowering more pro-lifers to become effective sidewalk advocates.
The impact from Unplanned in our organization has been like nothing we've ever seen. Our application rate is up about 8 times right now. These are folks who, after watching the movie Unplanned, really identified with the movie and said, I want to make a difference like that.
Sidewalk Advocates for Life is happy to help. The group encourages pro-lifers to connect with a local team or apply for their training program by going to their website.
We walk with you as long as you'd like to walk with us. We're here to help you to be successful on the sidewalk. And there's some really difficult scenarios that we're having to work through in modern times. And we're there to come alongside you and ensure that you have a life-affirming resource or answer for that woman that crosses your path.
Because you never know if your encounter and your conversation on your path might just save a life.
Never doubt the impact that one person can have, this power of one. But no doubt where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of them. And so sometimes when you just get a few more people on the sidewalk, got a couple of prayer powerhouses, you got someone reaching out with their words. I mean, it really is an incredible, unstoppable combination.
If you want to learn more about Sidewalk Advocates, including details about their upcoming October conference, go to sidewalkadvocates.org. That does it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. Until next time, be sure to reach us at prolifeweekly@ewtn.com or connect with us on social media. Just search for EWTN Pro-Life on all the major platforms. And remember, life is a gift. Your life is a gift. God bless.